Welcome to the Wisdom of Jacob's Ladder. I'm your host, Jacob Cooper, author of Life After Breath and the Wisdom of Jacob's Ladder. For those of you who are new to my podcast, please consider hitting that subscribe button, sharing a comment in the comments section, and following us on mindbodyspirit.fm for the audio syndicated podcast. For those of you who have been back here before, you're in for a special treat today. Today, our guest is Stephanie James. Stephanie is now a three-time author. She's going to be discussing her new book that just was released, Your Big Fat Juicy Life and Everything After. And Stephanie is also a fellow therapist. So she's going to be talking about spirituality, mental health, and the intersectionality of the two and more. She's also a filmmaker as well as a fellow podcast host on the mindbodyspirit.fm network, as I am too. So there's a lot of parallels that you'll see throughout the conversation, and I know that you'll get a lot of hard-earned, heartfelt, grounded, yet brilliant insights that Stephanie has to offer. Without further ado, we bring on Stephanie James on the Wisdom of Jacob's Ladder. Okay, welcome to the Wisdom of Jacob's Ladder, my honored guest and fellow mindbodyspirit.fm host, Stephanie James. An honor to have you.
So wonderful to be here with you, Jacob.
Stephanie, you are incredible. I mean, for people who know you, the thing that I normally get is you're just a beaming light, and just going up on that stage and just being there is healing. But for viewers who are not familiar with the work that we'll discuss in a bit, can you tell us a little bit about yourself and what got you to that point? Because you are really transforming so many lives, in the work that you're doing.
Oh, thank you, Jacob. Yep, same as you, much like you. Um, I always call it my day job is as a psychotherapist and as a transformation guide. And the other things that have just lit up my heart so much, in this last 7 years really is the dive into podcasting and filmmaking and writing my last 3 books and just feeling that divine flow. I feel like I've had that inner GPS my whole life. And it's just been so beautiful to watch that just expanding in the world and within myself. So I feel like the clearer of a conduit I become, the more of that divine love, energy, healing flows through me to other
Mhm.
people.
Wow. So you really have been transforming not only other people's lives, but the work that you're doing, it seems, through the last several years. But to take it back to the genesis of your work as a psychotherapist, how did that come to be? Did you come from a family of therapists or healers? How did that all start, and what drew you to the work, the clinical practice work that you started off in?
Yes, thank you for that. It's so interesting because as I grew up, my father was an economics professor at Colorado State University.
Totally
My
different field.
mom
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, yeah. And it is, and my mom, she owned her own florist shop for 33 years, and I had a lot of relatives that were in the field. I
Mhm.
had an uncle who was a family attachment specialist.
Wow.
I had an aunt who was a movement dance and movement therapist,
Mhm.
and another aunt who was a social worker who worked with people that had developmental disabilities, and so
Mm.
it was always kind of around. At one point, my father had a midlife, what I call transition, not necessarily a crisis, and went back to school and got another PhD. So he
Mhm.
became also a psychotherapist. And um, what's interesting, though, Jacob, that you don't know about me is it was actually my first year of school. I went to art school in
Mhm.
LA and wanted to be a fashion designer or interior designer. And it was only through certain circumstances, um, actually 1985, I hate to date myself here, but I am. The American embassy was bombed in London, and I was going to art school there the next year, and
Mhm,
that's what changed the course of my life.
mhm,
I ended up my a friend of mine, both she and my parents said, "You guys aren't going to London next year." And so I found myself back in Fort Collins and talking with a family friend who was a psychologist in the psychology department at CSU. And after we met, he said, "Stephanie, you're a natural at this. This
mhm,
is something that you just do in your life. And so I'm going to connect you to an advisor." And, the rest was history. And it was really just such a natural passion for me. I was always one of those people who wanted to dig deeper and not
mhm,
just know someone at the superficial level.
mhm,
So, knowing what makes someone tick, knowing the contents of their heart, to me, that's one of the most wonderful honors and part of the joy in being able to witness other people healing. Yeah,
mhm.
what a gift.
So not only do people, you see that you encounter in your work get that healing, you also feel that as well. Yeah.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Because, Jacob, I experience us as all of us as infinity signs with one another.
Mhm,
And so it's like the beautiful energy and healing that we put out there, we also receive that beautiful
mhm.
energy and healing within us. So it's such a beautiful exchange and that beautiful infinity sign.
Yeah. Similar to what Ram Dass said, who I think was also a psychologist, who said he didn't, like, identify himself as better than the client or like a therapist. He's like, "We're all a part of the same healing." Like, just as the client is getting healing, I'm getting healing. So it's, for him, he just saw it as mutual, reciprocity and healing, and it seems that is shining through in your work. Curious to you, I mean, I'm just, I don't know if you've ever been asked this, but you mentioned the artwork and, kind of like fashion design, stuff like that. Um, is there any parallels with that passion or that talent that you have in the work that you do now as a therapist? Do you see some of the parallels? Or is it totally two very different dichotomous kind of things?
It's so funny. I think that it's really, of course, there's a dichotomy in like the area of study. I'm not studying art
Mhm,
history and I'm not studying, I wasn't studying those classes in my graduate work.
mhm,
And I feel like it's just a love and this reverence for people and life. And that was evident for me in art
mhm,
and studying, whether it was fashion or whether I loved historical art. I mean, my art history class was just one of my favorites. I think there's just a reverence for the beauty, whether it's in art, in people, in the creative, which I really believe is that divine spark
mhm,
that's within all of us. And
mhm,
so for me, that would be the through line, really identifying and not only seeing that divine spark in each and every person I encounter, it's also helping them to see that within themselves,
mhm. Oh,
to
I
really
love it.
uncover what's in the way, whatever that is.
I'm curious, yeah, because I've heard some of my guests describe their work in this life's work as an artist. And I said, "What do you mean?" I hope that's not the case because I can't draw a damn thing. But they said, I help myself or my clients with the canvas that they have in front of them, and they become the artistes of their life. And so it's just kind of interesting how originally you wanted that, but it seems like indirectly, you're still doing that, but in a different way. You're the artist of the mind and of the spirit, helping people draw out their best, sculptures and pictures. As Michelangelo would say, "I don't do a thing. I just chip away at the masterpiece that's already there." And it seems like you're doing a lot of that. So
Truly.
for yeah, I'm sorry.
Well, I was just gonna say, I would say more, for me, I always consider it, I'm a little bit of an archaeologist.
Mhm,
So I help people, because that diamond sparkling heart and that true essence of who we are is always there. And sometimes situations and circumstances may cover that up,
mhm,
and we aren't able to see it. So I feel like part of my job is helping people to excavate that spark that is already within them.
mhm. How do people do that? How do people release that spark? I mean, do you have any, I know we're a very microwavable society where everyone wants, instant, recommendations, but, or you could be a good salesman and say, "Hey, pick up my book," which I highly recommend people getting or books now you're in the holy trinity, written in 3 books, but do you have any tips for viewers who are really feeling disconnected and understanding the conceptualization of this, but they want a pathway to unleash their spark? Any quick
Yes.
tips that you have?
Yeah, I would say the first thing is, as you said, there's no quick fix. There's no, I call it the light switch fix.
Mhm,
We can't just flip the light switch and then everything in our lives is perfect. What we can do, though, is move the needle daily.
mhm,
We can start moving the needle towards health and healing. And I really believe, Jacob, a part of it is actually stopping. There's
mhm,
so much power in the pause that we get so distracted from that inner light. We're on our phones and we're on social media, and we have all these things externally pulling and vying for our attention. And
mhm,
so when we pause and allow ourselves to drop into our hearts, and if you're familiar with heart math, this can be just a 2-minute process. So I would invite your listeners to do that. This is where we bring our brain and our hearts into coherence. And
mhm,
literally, what you do is drop out of your head and into your heart, putting your hand on your heart and breathing into your heart center, and
mhm,
continue to bring all of your attention and focus there. And then as you do, you may want to just bring up a pleasant memory, something
mhm,
that brought you happiness or joy or just a sense of peace. And as you breathe in those moments, your mind doesn't realize, our minds, whatever we hold up to our minds, they experience as happening now. That's why
mhm,
we can think of something, we might worry about something in the future. It's not happening now, but we start feeling anxious. Or we might ruminate about something in the past. Again, it's not happening now, but we start actually getting the chemical download and dump from that. And so
mhm,
our body physiologically is experiencing that as if it's happening. So the same beautiful thing is true if we're doing that heart centered drop in.
mhm,
Bring up something you want to remember, that you want to focus on, that brings you that sense of joy,
mhm,
and that dopamine drop will start to happen, and you will start to feel relieved and centered. And I
mhm,
believe, Jacob, that's the portal, that's the access point.
mhm. Very countercultural though, because as you mentioned before, our dopamine releases are largely based on what will happen or attainment to get something. And from what you're saying is groundbreaking that, it doesn't have to be something that's trending that you need to get outside yourself, but rather you could find that oasis right here, right now in the depths of your heart. Is that kind of what you're alluding to?
Absolutely. I had this card that was in a frame beside my bed for just, gosh, a decade at least. And it said, all the strength, all the beauty, all the wisdom you are searching for
Hmm.
are right there inside of you.
Hmm. Wow.
And it was just as this powerful reminder that, because I was programmed that way too. I was programmed that way as well, that you find, oh, I can prove or I can find love externally. I can prove or find worth from someone saying that I'm worthy or showing me that. And all those things that we are seeking truly are available to us
Hmm.
within us. They are us. So it's really just allowing ourselves to access that within us.
Love it. Love it. Now, you mentioned that there's been a transition within your practice from more the traditional, correct me if I'm wrong, clinical road that we're both on. And now, correct me if I'm wrong, you're doing, more, a little bit of transformational coaching as well. And you could speak probably better than this than I can. Uh, I'm wondering for you, like the why and the how, like why did that happen and how did you make that jump where you saw, you know what, clinical work is great, but there's something extra that needs to be entertained. So, how did you get to that point? And could you speak on maybe how psychological or clinical practice really could marry itself or work with itself in spirituality as well, too?
Yeah. And I think this is such an important question, Jacob,
Mhm,
because, as I worked with individuals, of course, when we're dealing with the whole person, it's not just even the emotional or psychological person, it's the spiritual self. And knowing that there is such a need to really allow people to explore that, to get in touch with that, to
mhm,
have those existential conversations.
Mhm.
I do have to say that existential psychology was my favorite class in grad school.
Right.
I did just love that. But also in my own journeys, as I learned breath work, as I learned, pranayama breath work, as I learned Kundalini yoga, as I
Mhm.
became a Reiki 2 master, certified master, um, I started just implementing just a little bit with clients.
Mhm.
And they were so receptive and so grateful to have that extra piece. And my life in some ways seemed very separated for a while in that I would just have my clinical practice, and then I would do these phenomenal spiritual
Mhm.
events, spiritual retreats with
Mhm.
women
Mhm.
and with men as well on a bigger scale on some of my bigger, workshops. But on a smaller scale, when I worked with women and we dove deep into the spiritual self, you could see that transformation and
Mhm.
that incredible alchemy just really taking place within a very short period of time.
Mhm.
And so it
Mhm.
just seemed to me that essential piece that those 2 truly are married. We can't, they're not mutually exclusive.
Mhm.
Although I think even, I don't know about your schooling, but
Mhm.
I know even though I had some of those incredible classes, we still things were very clinical. You address the
Mhm.
problem, you come up with a treatment plan,
Mhm.
and you're gonna deal with, cognitive behavioral therapy or like I'm a trauma specialist, so doing EMDR. But
Mhm.
I find that when I integrate cord cuttings, when we
Mhm.
do the pranayama breath work, and I have all my clients practice meditation and I have a chakra meditation that actually is available for free for all your listeners.
Oh.
It's on my website, and they're welcome to get it because I had so many clients saying, "Could you please just record that?" And it's just a 10-minute chakra activation. But so I guess
Mhm.
that's it, Jacob. It's this holistic. We cannot exclude any of these parts of ourselves.
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
so it to me it's just so beautiful because it's the depth and the width. It's the entire now being that gets to come into healing. And it's
Mhm.
so awesome to be able to be again witness and co-journeyer on that
Mhm.
path.
Mhm. Yeah. It's beautiful that you're able to not walk in, let's say, trepidation or fear, kind of tiptoeing around those things that you know are effective. And now you're able to really own those things in your practice and recognize the value that it has. So certainly, towards the end, we'll make sure to highlight your website so the viewers can find those beautiful meditations because Lord knows we need it now more than ever, obviously. Just a quick kind of question for you. When you went into the field of social work, and I'm a social worker as well, what drew you to that particular field versus, an LMHC or a psychologist? What drew you in particular to the social work field?
But when I first started, I think what I loved about social work was the systems approach.
Mm-hmm.
And really taking that generalist approach where you're
Mm-hmm.
looking at all the different ways that you can help support a human being.
Mm-hmm.
So there was something really beautiful for me about that. And I was so thankful for that diverse background because I worked with so many different populations before I went into private practice.
Mm-hmm.
I worked with developmentally disabled. For 3 years, I ran a cognitive behavioral therapy program at a mental health center for people that were paranoid schizophrenics.
Mm-hmm.
I
Wow.
worked in adolescent psych. I worked in geriatric psych and psychiatric hospitals. I worked for the school district for 10 years. I really got this beautiful sense of not only utilizing, that original social work background of
Mm-hmm.
working with families, working with systems, working with the community, and how can we bring all these different elements in to really support, that it takes a village for all of us. We all need that collective
Mm-hmm.
village. And so I feel like those things then in moving into my private practice the last 18 years were just invaluable. It's an invaluable foundation and base.
Mm-hmm.
And so, yes, I am so thankful for that.
Mm. Yeah. I mean, it's wonderful that you went into this field because I don't know about you, I'm sure you're seeing now that people don't just exist, in a vacuum and mental health. isn't just hereditary. There are a lot of social influences that are impacting our mental health, as we've seen through the pandemic and now the last couple of years, a lot of the mass divide that's going on the socio-political realm. And it's for us, it's like when we signed up for this moment, we just we feel like we went to school for this exact moment. Like, this is exactly why I went to school, and everything that we learned to address or to not to do is now thrown in a lot of people's faces. But could you speak to, you know, social work and its influence, societal influence on mental health, and how people can maybe navigate without getting too direct, because obviously there's, viewers on all types of totems poles, but how people can navigate a lot of the mass, information and hysteria that's going on, in parts of the world and in the US especially these days.
Yeah. I'm just gonna address that from not just a social work perspective. I wanna address that just from a human perspective and a
Human, yeah,
spiritual perspective,
yeah, yeah.
because I do feel like not only did we go to school for this, I think we signed up in this
Mhm,
incarnation for
mhm,
this specific, school, if you will, this school of life.
yeah,
And, so many of my own clients come to me and they really come with a sense of helplessness around, I don't know what I can do. How can I make any kind of change right now? And
mhm,
that helplessness can really cause the anxiety, fear, panic.
mhm,
And so part of what we talk about is the importance of really looking at, first of all, we did not get news 24/7. I definitely didn't experience that when I was growing up. It didn't mean we didn't care what was we didn't care about what was going on in the world, but we definitely were also able to just be in our realm, be in our world,
mhm,
be in our small microcosm, if you will. But I do believe that the work of I consider this, our humanness, our spiritualness, it's a conduit. So
mhm,
we're conduits for the divine. And so we want to make sure that we're working on how can we keep that as clear as possible.
mhm,
So we can clear out, I always say, the cobwebs as they come in. So we can be greater conduits of
mhm.
love and healing to flow to us and through us and to others. And so I think when people are feeling helpless, again, it's focusing on that love and that light that you are
Mhm,
and doing the things that you need to do to resource yourself. So that might be walks in nature.
mhm,
That might be I'm such a I've meditated for 28 years now. And so meditation being such a stronghold in my
mhm,
life and
mhm,
feeling like that's an incredible place where we can come to center and where we can come to that connection where we are not separate from the divine, that
mhm,
the divine is in us as us, and then we are also connected to everyone else. Again, the analogy of being drops in the ocean. You know,
mhm,
I always say we're each one of us are golden threads in the tapestry of humanity.
mhm,
So on the front of my film poster, When Sparks Ignite, which is still playing right now on Humanity's String Plus, that's one of the things on the front of the poster. It says, Your period healing period matters, period.
mhm,
And that's what it's about. If we want to help contribute, we want to be as clear of conduits as possible. So as we do our own healing, our own meditation, then from there, how we
mhm,
are able to enact change is the way we show up in every encounter, whether
mm,
it's the person that hands us our coffee or sacks our groceries. And I say it's also the person that cuts us off in traffic.
mhm,
How are we responding to those situations? Because those small acts of love or kindness put out into the world
mhm,
become the pebbles in the pond,
mhm,
and that those circles of well-being radiate from us. Now, this isn't to say that's all we do. I know there's people that for them, being more of an activist is
mhm,
where their heart lies and what they want to do. And, that is absolutely great if that's where they are. Again, the point of power is in the present moment. I
mhm,
do really, really believe that it starts with being right here, right inside of our hearts. That doesn't mean at the exclusion of anyone else.
mhm,
It really is the old adage of put on your own oxygen mask first, and then you can assist others. Because
mhm,
then you show up with greater resilience, greater capacity. because you have gifted yourself with that divine connection, and then you are really spreading that. Um, and honestly, that's, Stephanie Schwartz, who's one of the most incredible scientists of our
Mhm.
century, speaks of that the tipping point for all of us into an age of higher consciousness where there's not all this war and not all this conflict going on. He says, it's not 51%. 51% is not the tipping point. It's actually 10%.
Hmm.
And that when 10% of any given cohort, and this has been proved over and over again throughout history, when 10% of any given cohort has a change in consciousness, the rest of the cohort has to adjust. So whether that's a church or a school or a community,
Mhm.
it was like when one of the examples he gives, and he speaks about this in my film, is when it used to be, LGBT, and then
Mhm.
it was LGBTQ, and then it continued, as the awareness
Mhm.
rose, then people had to adjust. People adjusted their awareness. And I love he says, people said, "Hey, I have a friend that's gay, or my son is gay, and
Mhm.
they're pretty good people." And so that
Mhm.
started opening up people's, like, wow, we can start accepting this. We don't have to other people so much.
Mhm.
And so
Mhm.
that's my message of really feeling like we can step into a point
Mhm.
of power. We can step into change. It doesn't
Mhm.
have to all be external. It starts
Mhm.
internally and then we can radiate it out.
Love it, love it, love it. As I say, thinking globally by acting locally. And it seemed, correct me if I'm wrong, seemed like a lot of what you're saying, um, obviously every word was beautiful, but it was also just illustrating the value that spirit has with navigating some of the challenges in our life and how it relates to our well-being and our mental health. It's hard to explain like in one word because spirit is very versatile. But, I don't know about you, but to me, what is spirit is just the embodiment of the light, in our lives and really spreading that, connecting to it and spreading it to other people and having that as something that we connect to instead of having all the despair as things that we're solely connect to. But you mentioned also that you, do a lot you do film work, correct me if I'm wrong, and I'm curious too, how did that all start about? Was it, maybe because you were seeing so much of people's focus was on mainstream news, and you were like, "You know what? If people are gonna be watching something on the screen, I wanna have something that's actually gonna help people, and make, a change." They say, it's one thing to complain about something, it's another thing to do something about it, and you are a doer. But I'm just wondering, how did you get to that point? Because that's a very hard world to break into in some ways, and it's very courageous as well.
Thank you. Jacob, this is about 7 years ago. I was
Mhm.
doing a specific meditation,
Mhm.
and it was Misa Hopkins holding meditation. And it
Mhm.
was really an invitation to go into the dark.
Mhm.
And the dark not being bad, the dark being, almost like a womb space or the space of creation. And about 3 months into doing that meditation, one night, right as I finished, I got the download. And it was like, you, because of my podcast, I was like, some of the most brilliant minds and serving hearts on the planet. We need
Mhm.
to bring them together and do this event. And it's going to be filmed and it's going to help create this positive change. I mean, and that's how a lot of these things happen to me. They're extremely serendipitous. They're absolutely divine download. And I always say, mind you, Jacob, at the time I had just gone through a divorce and I had 67 cents in my savings account.
Wow.
How in the world was I going to create a movie?
Mhm.
And yet, serendipitously, the most powerful and beautiful, beautiful souls came through. Larry Dossi, Jacob Lieberman,
Mhm.
Stephanie Schwartz, Sedina and George Caponelli. And it was these things where I would meet someone and they'd say, "Oh, you're going to Santa Fe. Well, call the Dossies." Larry Dossi lives in Santa Fe,
Mhm.
and the Caponellis live in Santa Fe. Well, the Caponellis are television and film producers.
Mhm.
And when I met with them for breakfast, not only did they say, "Oh my gosh, we want to be a part of this film, but
Mhm.
let us introduce you to our award winning film crew."
Mhm. Wow.
And everyone came on board and everyone was so phenomenal. And so we had these 3 days of incredible connection where the other piece that had come through is to have these thought leaders come together and not just present
Mhm,
for 45 minutes or an hour and then walk off and, you never see him again.
mhm,
Everyone came early, and what we did and we filmed this, so it's such a beautiful part of the film, is we sang together, we prayed together, we meditated together, we danced together and shared wonderful meals. And so we had our own alchemy that was created. So on the 3rd day, when we went to the live audience, it was, everyone there, as Jacob Lieberman said, I love this. He said, we're all the same height, which means there's no one that's more important than anyone else. And
mhm,
the other presenters stayed in the audience. They held
mhm,
space. They became a part of what was happening.
mhm,
And you just see it as you progress through the film. This beautiful transformation that wasn't just with the audience, it was also within the presenters. And we
mhm,
have stayed connected ever since. We call ourselves the Sparks. And I mean, some of my dearest, closest friends came out of that experience. And
mhm,
so and so that's been such a joy. And again, it's called When Sparks Ignite. Sparks, that's my brand. My trademark is the spark. And so it's just been beautiful seeing it ignite,
mhm,
all these other people and continue to spread and to bring light and healing all over the
mhm.
world.
Wow. It's very Christ-like by the presenters in a way because, a lot of times people go to presentations and just feel that that presenter is on another pedestal or there's some an ivory tower. In what was Christ, one of his biggest statements was, "The kingdom of heaven and me is in you too." And that was very empowering, I'm sure, for the attendees to just really see like, "Hey, we're all the same, we're all in this together," and to see, if I'm seeing something beautiful in a presenter, that's really evocative of that spark that, as you say, that I have. So wonderful work that you are doing, and it seems like intuition has really been something that you've been tapping into, the last, like, several years, but 7 years in particular. For viewers who are interested, this is one of my favorite questions. How do you know when it's intuition versus a regurgitated thought or something that you're wishing? And, like, how do you, like, have the courage to act on that? Because as you said, like, I had a couple cents, in my name and, as we know, the film industry is, like, for every, like, 5 minutes, it's, like, thousands it's a big undergoing, like, how how could you speak a little bit to that? Yeah.
Well, I feel like if it's a thought, if I'm thinking about something, there's maybe a sense of desire or wishing, there's a certain emotion connected to when we want something.
Mhm,
So if it's just a thought, there's that very also human quality, I guess, to it, where it's like, oh, I hope this happens or I wish this happens.
mhm,
And honestly, when I get a download, and I have throughout my entire life, actually, it's been something that has been this beautiful guiding um, inner GPS. To me, it's a very distinctive uh, sensation because it's not this clear voice that's external, but it's an internal voice that is very clearly not mine.
mhm,
Um, and it holds just a higher frequency and actually just more of uh, like it happened to me when I moved here. I just moved 3 months ago here to Santa Fe. And I say it wasn't a decision, it was a directive.
mhm, mhm,
And that's how I experience it was like, you're moving to Santa Fe.
uh-huh.
And just to share with you so that makes you have a little context around that,
No,
Jacob.
I love that. Is it kinda like you ever see Field of Dreams with Kevin Costner?
Oh, yeah.
And, that's a great movie in intuition, but he's in this, like, corn maze and a cornfield, and there's a voice that says, "Go the distance," and he's like, "Who is that? What are you saying?" And he's like, "If you build it, they will come." And it just didn't seem logical. What is a farmer doing? And he's, building this baseball field and there's a big ruckus. But that movie to me embodies intuition more so than any other like and it wasn't so intentional. It wasn't like some metaphysically inclined movie, but really spoke to higher truths. Is that a little bit I don't know if James Earl Jones is coming to you and saying that, but is that a little bit about now that he's passed, maybe, but do you feel that is it like a different voice that you're hearing beyond yours? Is that kind of it?
Yes, yeah. And I'll tell you, the move to Santa Fe, one of the reasons that it's so powerful for me too, is that I've only had that happen one other time in my life 32 years ago.
Mm,
And so
wow.
I wanna share this quick story with you because for context, it is
We love story
really
we love
well,
stories.
great because I think it just really helps lend to why I left, my hometown that I had grown up in, although I had lived away for a while for 17 years, and then I had been back for the last 12 years. But, my parents lived 6 blocks from me. My cousin and his wife and kids lived right next door. My daughters were both 15 and 20 minutes away with my grandsons. My whole life was there in Fort Collins, and yet when I got this directive, it was so strong. Within a month, I had packed up everything, sold most of my furniture, and moved.
Mhm,
And the reason that I followed that was because, you know, mainly in part to 32 years before, the only other time I heard that same voice saying,
mhm,
"You need to go," I was actually with a large bunch of girlfriends. I had girlfriends from high school, college, and then
mm,
the women I was working with at this adolescent psych unit in Aurora. I was
mm,
living in Denver at the time, and I was a single mom, and, we were having the time of our life. My aunt owned a second home up in Vail,
mm,
Colorado,
yeah,
and we were having this big ski weekend and so much fun. Everything was just perfect until the night we got ready to go home. So it was
mm,
Saturday night, and I was getting ready to go to bed, and the voice came in, and it
mhm,
said, "You need to move back to Fort Collins." It was very strong and very urgent.
huh,
And I just started crying, and the gal I was sharing a room with said, "What's going on?" I said, "I don't know, but this is so strong. It's so
mhm,
strong, I have to follow it." And I called my mom the next day, and I always say I don't usually remember dates, but I'll always remember this one
mhm,
because it was January 14th, the Sunday that I called my mom, and my lease was up in my apartment February 1st.
mm,
And I called my mom and I said, "Mom, I know I don't have a job. I know I don't have any place to live, but I need to come home. I'm getting this message so strongly." And she says to me, "Well, Stephanie, that's interesting because our renter isn't going to continue his lease. So the house is available February 1st."
mm,
So that
what?
was the first, like, okay. I
Mm,
said, "All right, I'm going to give my 2 weeks notice tomorrow at work and I'm going to move home." So I did.
yeah,
Within a week, I had a job. And the more powerful thing was 3 weeks to the day that I moved home, I got a phone call from one of my girlfriends that worked with me at the or the psychiatric hospital, and the adolescent unit had been shut down and everyone had
yeah,
been laid off.
wow,
And
and
the front page of the Rocky Mountain newspaper said, "Psychiatric abuses charged."
oh,
And unbeknownst to us, we had scouts going off. This is before managed care, finding kids to come into treatment, and then they would stay there until their insurance was used up, 7 to 9 months, and then these scouts were getting, like, $5,000 kickbacks. So,
mm,
absolutely, totally illegal, and it never reopened under that hospital name. I would have been a single mom, just signed a lease, no job. It would have
mm.
been so stressful, and instead, it was just seamless because I listened to spirit.
It really is incredibly transformative in your life, and you just wonder how many more lives would be transformed if they follow that similar trajectory, because it's not like spirit is just looking out for one person and neglecting everyone. They want us to be happy, to enjoy. And it seems like a big part of our evolution is trust and fine tuning the ability to not just listen to that voice, but the courage to act on it. And you live it, clearly you do. And obviously, with the recent move, as you just mentioned, to Santa Fe, you've really listened to it and you always see at the end, you're glad that you did that. So you walk the talk, my friend. You know, so you have, a beautiful book that came out, if I'm not mistaken, late March of this year, right? Um,
Yeah, our
and
official release date was the middle of April, but yeah,
middle of
yeah.
April, okay, so around that, and it's called Your Big Fat, Juicy Life and Everything After, and I'm just curious, for you, what led you to that title? Because I know certainly in our culture, the word fat has a stigma, but, in Eastern traditions, the Buddha, fat is someone who has abundance. I'm wondering, for you, what led you to the title as well as that subtitle, or if that's a part of the title, and everything after, because that really caught my attention. Could you speak, a little bit to that to viewers and where they could also, check out your books further as well?
Sure, sure. Thank you. Yeah, so again, there's a little story with this because it really is how the book got its title, and, um, this book has been so fascinating
Mhm.
because it was a little over a year ago, so it was a year ago in March. I was interviewing Neil Donald Walsh on my show, and for those listeners that don't know who that is,
Oh, we know
he's
Neil.
the
Yeah, we've
okay,
had him. We've had him twice here. We know him.
okay, so you know Neil, the Conversations
Yeah,
with God guy,
yeah. Yeah.
and he and I got on the call together, and we couldn't get to the interview. We were just having this beautiful, just heart to heart connection and conversation. And so we just kept talking. It took us about half an hour to finally say, okay, we got to do the interview. What was beautiful is it was all being recorded. So you see this, I don't share this. This is, this first half hour is my personal treasure now. But at one point, Neil says, you see him, he gets a download. And he says to me, Stephanie, you're going to write your next book and you're going to start tomorrow morning. And this book is
Well,
going to have a global impact and I'm going to endorse this book.
mm, mm,
Well, needless to say, I started writing the next day. And I woke up the next morning and started writing. And interestingly, my first two books each took 9 months apiece
mhm,
to write. It was much like gestating a baby. And
mm,
this book came in, I mean, literally downloaded in under 6 weeks, a little under
mhm.
6 weeks.
Wow.
It was such a powerful process.
Mhm,
And then, as you know, if you've read the book, Jacob, the people that came through to be a part of this book, like Wayne Dyer's daughter Sage and his wife
mhm,
Marceline and Suzanne Giesman,
mhm,
powerful psychic medium Suzanne Giesman, um, Stephen Simon, who's the Academy Award winning film
mhm.
producer of What Dreams May Come, Ariel Ford. I mean, it was just
Wow.
person after person showing up with their stories to really reinforce my own journey, which is shared within that book.
Mhm,
Um, and so many others of just beautiful things that death isn't the end, that
mhm,
it's just the next chapter in our book of eternity. And at one point, when Neil first got the hit about this book, he thought it was going to be called I'm Dying to Tell You About Death. But
mm,
as my agent and I continued marketing the book, some of the feedback we got is right now, because the world is so crazy, nobody wants to read another book about death. And
mhm,
then we'd kind of laugh because this book isn't about death. It's really about life. And that once we befriend and accept death, we can really befriend it.
mhm,
Instead of it being the number one fear, it becomes something that then once we know, okay, it's just going to be a portal, it's just going to be another
mhm,
transition.
mhm,
Then when we no longer fear death, then we can be more present to this moment.
mhm,
And then this moment becomes more sacred. And we
mhm,
really are able to create this big, fat, juicy life that all of it's juicy. And
mhm,
Jacob, I want to, I guess, say in that as well that part of what that book talks about, I mean, that book talks about grief and it talks about the shadow emotions. And that part of having a juicy life isn't that you're just happy all the time or that you feel joy all the time. It's that you
mhm,
have the full experience of life being this dual human and spiritual being.
mhm,
And so that's going to come with sometimes that deep sorrow, or it's going to come with anger or whatever those other things are. But it's
mhm,
not at the exclusion of them. As we embrace those as just part of who we are and part of our journey, we can
mhm.
befriend those parts of ourselves as well.
Wow. I love it. It seems like a really wonderful book that's very eclectic, that really imparts a lot of wisdom. from the hereafter, higher consciousness, and it really highlights and marinates your background that's able to meet people on the ground level. Because you see with so much of the spiritual work, there could be a degree of bypassing, and it seems like you're able to really utilize the 2 worlds and harmonize and synergize those beautifully, and it's just wonderful that that message came for you by NDW, who's just, we love him to life because there is no death, but you know what I'm saying? And, it's just wonderful that you had that connection. It was meant to be, and glad that you were able to really act on it because this seems like a book that was similar to Neil's, where Neil's books were really downloaded, didn't come from him, it came through him, and it was such an easier process. Would you say that this was an automatic writing, book? Was that I don't know, it's, like, hard to define, but was that a part of it in a way?
Yeah, I would say that absolutely. I mean, for me, I didn't sit there and think about what I was gonna write
It
ever.
just float
I
it
mean,
flowed for
yeah,
you,
like
yeah.
there were times I would be woken up at 4:30 in the morning
Mhm.
and I would just get on the computer and write for 3 hours. I mean,
Wow.
and I would just show up. I just showed up every day
Mhm.
and then whatever was supposed to come through would come through.
Mhm.
And so, I mean, it was such a beautiful, incredible process. Um and so as I said, I mean, all those interviews with people, all these conversations with specific people, it came through within that 6-week period
Mhm.
so powerfully. And so yeah, I'm so thrilled to be able to share it
Mhm. I
because as I
love it.
said, I think it touches so many people's hearts in that it brings calm and peace as well as excitement about our journeys. And you said it earlier, none of us are immune to having intuition. None of us are
Mhm.
separated,
Mhm.
from spirit. And so we all can have these experiences. And so hopefully the book becomes, one of these guideposts to helping
Mhm.
people on their journey to find more and more of this within themselves
Mhm.
and tap into that divine essence and the greater essence of life that is
Uh,
within each one of us.
wow. It's very social worky to have the inclusivity within spirituality because you see, there's a lot of exclusivity it seems, but for you, the work that you're trying to do is to really to have everyone own this, not just a select few. So that's beautiful that you're doing, and there's just so many resources that people could really gain from the work that you do, from the films, to your podcast, to your books. So wonderful. My last question before we go is it more important to have meaning, enjoy, or to be happy? I always am curious about that.
Okay, that's really an interesting question. I've never been asked before. To me, happiness, it's an emotion.
Mhm,
So it comes and goes.
mhm,
If we think of meaningness in joy, I guess part of what I'm hearing you say then is it's something, we want to work on our state of beingness. And I think when we are in touch with that internal, I keep referring to it as the spark, but it is when we're in that place of being in connection with our higher self, our divine self,
mhm,
then that is the access point, I think, for peace, for well being. And from there, naturally, inherently, is the sense of joy.
mhm,
And from there, I think then we can start to see deeper meaning in all the things.
mhm,
I can
mhm,
think about just today. I'm not only with my own dog, but we're watching a neighbor's dog, and so the 3 of us were out. I live on 5 acres out here in the country, so we are just walking down these dirt roads today with just the dogs, and then just pausing and hearing the wind through the trees, hearing the birds, just breathing in, everything that's happening right now. And it's like, that is to me, that's the ultimate joy, being
mhm,
present to that moment, savoring that moment. And
mhm.
so that's accessible to all of us. As I said at the beginning, it's when we pause, we take
Uh,
that deep breath in the moment, you bring your senses in, and it's like, in this moment, life is good. Even if
mhm,
we're dealing with challenges, we're breathing. Something bigger than us is beating our heart. Um, there's just this inherent joy in being alive.
mm. It's very evocative of your guy Wayne Dyer, who would say, "The moment you change the way you look at things, the things you look at change." And so that same tree that you, like, walk a million miles an hour by with all your thoughts, all of a sudden, when you're in stillness, could take on a whole new meaning, and you feel a connection to maybe the tree and its branches and the canopies and the light going down it, and it just is amazing what could happen when we're alive while we're alive. Because most people are just, they're in their heads, but not in their life, and so that's a beautiful, teaching that you just imparted. Well,
Thank
anyway,
you.
yeah, Stephanie, before we talk about how to find you and your podcast, everything like that, is there any other downloads that you're getting for the viewers or messages? I'm sure we could have hours of this topic for you because you're very, very tuned in. But anything else that is really coming to your higher self that you would like the viewers to really know and remember at this time, or you feel like, hey, Jacob, I could drop the mic, we're good,
Well, I'm reminded of Michael Singer, this beautiful quote that he has where he writes, "Suffering is when we want this moment to be anything other than what it is."
Mhm,
So that is a piece I think for all of us in embracing this moment.
mhm,
Really being with our breath, being embodied, being behind our own eyes, dropping into our own hearts. And as you do that, as your listeners do that, I really do believe if we're in touch with that essence that is us, then we can't help but show up in the world in a better place. We can't
mm,
help but start interacting with people from that place. And that
mhm,
place is that connected source where we are all free and we are all one.
mm,
So that is my hope. That is my message that it is accessible to each and every one of us,
mhm,
each and every listener. You have this divine spark inside of you. And as you tap in, I always say, go within, and then you can go not without, but you can go externally. And then you can share that light. And our collective lights are what are going to illuminate the world.
wow. I love it, and as I say, whatever happens, good or bad, show up and just say yes to the moment and find ways to really embody that light. So that's wonderful imparting words. Stephanie James, a big honor to have you. We'd love to have you back whenever you're available. Now, where could people find you if they want to maybe schedule a session with you or to find, as you mentioned, some of your awesome meditations and chakra meditations? I mean, as well as your books, and I could have a whole podcast just filled with the stuff that you do, so I'll let you, fill in the blanks, but, where's the best way for people to find all things Stephanie James?
Yeah, a great access point would be go to my website, which
Mm,
is stephaniejames.world.
mhm,
And stephaniejames.world, they can find books, films. There's a trailer to my film. You can find out about retreats that I'm doing. We're going to be doing an incredible retreat here in Santa Fe, September 19th through the 21st. More information to come about that. You can order my books from the website. Some of my books are on Amazon. All my books are on Amazon, but like Becoming Fierce, you can get that, my book Becoming Fierce, anywhere.
mhm.
And my film When Sparks Ignite is on Humanity's Scream Plus, as I said. And I'm on the same station as Jacob for Igniting the Spark podcast on mindbodyspirit.fm.
Wow, and that you do every day in every way. Thank you so much. Please check out all things Stephanie James. Your lives will really be transformed and transcended. And thank you, Stephanie, for the amazing work that you're doing and just the lives that you're able to touch in so many different ways.
Oh, thank you, Jacob. It's such an honor to be here with you. Thank you.
Well, that was a wonderful conversation with Stephanie James. I hope you enjoyed it as much as I do and feel a sense of invigoration to really take a lot more power into your lives and connect to spirit and bring that into your lives to navigate the waters ahead and the challenges that lead to opportunities of growth. Thank you so much, Stephanie, for her generous time. And thank you for tuning in to our conversation, where I know this one really helped really will help many minds and hearts ascend on their own evolutionary ladder. Thank you all for tuning in. It's been real, and we'll see you here on the Wisdom of Jacob's Ladder for our next interview coming up shortly. Thank you.